Hard not to like what we saw from Gustav Nyquist after he was acquired by the Wild at the trade deadline. The only problem, I wish we could have seen a little more. We discuss Gustav Nyquist's 2022-2023 season on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we are glad to have you on board and hope that you tune in through the rest of the offseason and beyond. If you are an everydayer that tunes in each and every day of the week, we are glad that you are back. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Gustav Nyquist gets his season recap in the books. We'll hand out some letter grades for what we saw from Nyquist after he was acquired by the Minnesota Wild, and we'll look at what is in store for the unrestricted free agent and whether or not the Wild could potentially work him into their roster next year and beyond. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and this was a kind of cherry on top of a very busy trade deadline for Bill Guerin. He acquired a bunch of veteran players that could provide some additional experience in the postseason in Nyquist and Oskar Sundqvist, who we'll talk about on tomorrow's show. And you also had John Klingberg acquired at the trade deadline as well. So the theme being postseason experience and a little physicality as well. And if you remember, Nyquist, when he was acquired, was injured. And so it was a situation where Guerin made a trade that was a little bit more of a long play than a guy like Oskar Sundqvist or John Klingberg when they were initially acquired. So we heard about Nyquist rehabbing and trying to work himself back into game shape. That day finally came with the regular season winding down right at the same time that Kirill Kaprizov was trying to get himself ready to be able to come back before the postseason started. And all told, Nyquist ended up playing 3 games for the Minnesota Wild after playing in 48 for the Columbus Blue Jackets last year. He had 1 goal and 4 assists in those 3 games. So 5 total points. He was a +2 in those 3 total games. For Nyquist, he had 5 shots in those 3 games and played right around, on average, 14 minutes, 41 seconds of ice time, had 2 blocks, 2 hits, 3 takeaways, and no giveaways in that 3-game regular season sample size. We moved to the postseason as well, and Nyquist in 6 postseason games had 5 assists. He was a +4, did have 2 penalty minutes, but still had 5 points in those 6 games, had 9 shots on goal, played 16 minutes, 1 second per game, and had 3 blocks, 2 hits, 3 takeaways, and 2 giveaways. So continued that impressive stretch into the postseason. But as we alluded to off the top of the show, the big theme for Nyquist, and it was not something that necessarily he could control, we wanted more. He looked really good when he played down the stretch for the Wild, had some really good puck handling skills. He had great hands. He had some great maneuverability through tight spots and just looked like a guy that could be a real big impact player for this team, especially with things going wrong in the first couple of games of the series against the Dallas Stars after winning game 1. He looked like a guy that could help once the Stars started to turn the tide in that series. And it's nothing that Nyquist could control because it seemed like when there were opportunities with guys like Matt Zuccarello struggling in the top 6, or just opportunities to try to get Nyquist more time on the ice, and it just didn't happen. Even to the pivotal Game 6 in the series, in which the Stars ended up finishing things off, you had the thought of some lineup tweaks, and I remember pretty distinctly wondering, are we going to get Gustav Nyquist on the top line or on the second line to try to maximize some of his abilities to make plays and to set teammates up in really good situations to try to score some goals on Jake Ottinger? It didn't happen. And so you ended up with a third line that featured most commonly Sam Steele, Gustav Nyquist, and Marcus Foligno. And it didn't seem like that line really worked all that well because, for one, Foligno wasn't playing a ton because he was in the penalty box half the series. Sam Steele was kind of trying to do his thing, but Steele has limitations to his game that just, I think, as the season wore on, became pretty evident. And we just had, similar to what we have seen from Dean Evison-led teams, in that you're seeing kind of the same combinations time and time again and ramming your head into the wall. And so we didn't end up getting an opportunity to see what more Gustav Nyquist had in the tank. We got the sample size in the regular season, and we got to see bits and pieces of really consistent play from Nyquist, but just never had the opportunity for him to be elevated into a bigger role. And so for Nyquist, it's interesting because when looking at potential opportunities for next year, do you want to go to a place where you were penciled in as a third line guy and really never moved from that spot? And I know you're not going to pull Kaprizov off the top line. You're not going to pull Boldy off the second line. But there were other spots, and there are other opportunities to just give a guy ice time and give him looks with particular players to see if you find something that can maybe help turn the tide in a series. And I really do think that Nyquist could have given this team more. He just was never put in an opportunity to be able to do it. And so we saw a really good acquisition for cheap, a 5th-round pick in this year's draft in a season in which Bill Guerin made a couple of trades to help facilitate other moves and pulled picks back in, where it basically costs you nothing. It basically cost you nothing to acquire Gustav Nyquist, and he had that big of an impact on how this team did down the stretch, and then just was not properly utilized in the postseason. So it's frustrating for me because he was hands down one of the best players in the series for the Minnesota Wild in a postseason series in which there were many players that basically just took a nap. And so to not give him the opportunity to do more and to show that he's capable of doing more is just immensely frustrating. But all in all, a good season for Nyquist. And to further that point, we take a look at the stats from Natural Stat Trick for the postseason. Gustav Nyquist, when he was on the ice by himself, goals for per 60 for Nyquist, second highest, third highest on the team, behind Oscar Sundqvist, who played one game, and John Klingberg, ironically enough. Nyquist's goals for per 60 was 4.5. His goals against per 60 was 1.5, which was amongst the lowest on the team. So the stats back up the fact that we saw a guy who really had some good things to show and just was not put in an opportunity to be able to do it. Now, Corsi for percentage was just under 46. But again, I think a lot of that stems from the line combinations that Nyquist found himself with. And so all in all, it was a great acquisition, maybe the best of the trade deadline acquisitions by Bill Guerin, but head coach had other plans. So all in all, I loved what we saw from Nyquist. I would love to see him back, as we'll talk about in a little bit. And I would love to have had the opportunity to see him do his thing in a higher capacity. Now we'll take a look at some letter grades for Nyquist in what he was able to do with the team in the final few games of the season. That is on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. There is absolutely nothing that is as stressful as trying to find tickets for an event the day of. But Game Time is here to help turn that process into the fastest and easiest way possible. Game Time can help you find tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. The best thing about Game Time is they show you images of your seats before you buy so you can see vantage points and whether or not you'll be having to try to look around a post from your point of view. They also have the lowest price guarantee plus event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, you can tune in for tomorrow's episode in which we will evaluate Oskar Sundqvist as we continue through our player evaluations. We will revisit the Jordan Greenway topic. Wanted to lump that in a little bit more with Bill Guerin, as we'll give him probably most of a week to evaluate the season, Guerin's approach in general. So we're going to put that one on the back burner for now, but we will get to it when we get to Bill Guerin week. Letter grades for Gustav Nyquist for what he was able to do throughout the course of the season. We'll start on the offensive end in the regular season. Now, it is a small sample size, 3 games, but it was hard not to be impressed with really any aspect of Nyquist's game that he brought to the table. And so for offense, for Nyquist, I'm going to go with an A. I think what he was able to do in terms of facilitating, setting teammates up, and just making really solid plays when he was out on the ice that impacted the game, that were not something that maybe showed up in the score sheet, but had an impact on the overall outcome of the game. I'm going solid A for offense. He was a player that looked like somebody that had a plan out there and really was good at executing what he was able to do. On the defensive side of the ice, Nyquist is known more as an offensive type player, but that's not to say that his defense isn't bad. So I think we're going to go C+ here. Again, you're asking him to contribute more on offense, so it's not like you're asking for defensive contributions and not getting them. It's just Nyquist, his game is offense. And so we're going C+ defensively. Special teams is tricky because Nyquist did see some time on the power play, although it was on the second unit, which by and large still a mess. How much of that is his fault is hard to say because when he did play with some of those other top guys, they're kind of holding on to the puck way too much, passing too much. And so how much does that impact what he was able to do in the game? And so I'm going to go with the C+ on special teams as well. Again, there were some factors I think in play that he couldn't really control because of what some of his teammates were doing to not generate chances and goals in those opportunities. In the postseason, quite frankly, he was maybe the best player on the ice for the Wild throughout the course of the series. And as I alluded to, and as I was pretty frustrated about, just didn't get an opportunity to get more minutes out there. Was put on that third line, and that was pretty much it. So I'm going to give Nyquist an A- for the postseason. Honestly, I think he was that impressive with what he did. I remember clamoring from the XL Energy Center press box for more. Double shift him, put him up higher in the lineup, put him in the top six, put him on the top line, do something to get more opportunities for him to show what he's got. And we didn't get it. So I'm going A- for the postseason because I just think he played very solid with what he was asked to do. And a lot of guys around him did not. And so if you're looking at an overall grade for Nyquist, honestly, I'm probably going to go with an A-. I was really impressed with what we saw. Evidently, Dean was more impressed with Sam Steele than he was with Gustav Nyquist. So that's just how it goes, I guess. So I'm going A-. Again, cannot further the point enough, if you haven't noticed, that I really liked what we saw with Nyquist. I really, really wanted an opportunity to see more of it too. So A- for Nyquist. In terms of a short list of players that are on this team that are impending free agents that we would like to see return, he is way up near the top of the list. And so we'll look at some of the particulars for Nyquist and what it may take to retain him on a longer deal. That is on the way as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Are you tired of feeling restricted in your shorts? Want to look good and feel comfortable at the same time? Look no further than Bird Dogs, the ultimate solution for the modern man. Bird Dog stretch khaki shorts are specifically designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Say goodbye to baggy, shapeless shorts and hello to the confidence of a tailored fit. But here's the secret. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as those other big name brands, but they fit way better. No more compromising on comfort or style. Bird Dogs has revolutionized shorts by inventing cloud knit fabric, a magical blend that looks just like khaki but stretches, allowing you to move freely while maintaining a slim and stylish appearance. But wait, there is more. When you order from birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter promo code LockedOnNHL, you'll receive a free Yeti-style tumbler as their gift to you. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter the promo code LockedOnNHL. You won't take your Bird Dogs off. I can promise you that. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Everydayers can tune into tomorrow's episode where we will evaluate what we saw from Oskar Sundqvist. Similar situation for him as with Gustav Nyquist. Just didn't really get the opportunity to help this team out more. And I think it was possible that that Sundqvist could have had he been put in the lineup any more than he was, but that's neither here nor there. So Nyquist, an impending free agent at the age of 33, and honestly, I would love to see Nyquist come back to try to have a little more of an impact for this team, and I think he would be capable of helping them out offensively. It's just I don't know what the money would look like for his next contract. Now, looking at a couple of things in particular for Nyquist, he was injured this year, had a shoulder injury that limited him to 51 games, but he played 82 games last year, was an 18-goal scorer, 53 points on the season. He had 15 goals in 70 games the year before that. He played 81 games the year before that. And so you look at from basically his age 25 season when he started to play full-time in the NHL, he's been right around a 70 or an 80 game per year player. And so I don't think you look at what happened to him this year as like a lingering concern. You look at it more as one of those, oh, he sustained a pretty major injury and just had to work his way back. So I don't think there are injury concerns with what Nyquist brings to the table. It would have to be a shorter term deal at the age of 33. You'd want to do something maybe around 2 years. But the big thing is that if you were going to try to retain Nyquist and keep him around, you would need to move someone to be able to free up the cap space and to free up the roster spot. And let's look at in your top 6 who that would be, because I don't think we're going to do ourselves any favors by putting Nyquist on the third line, as was the case this past season. You've got Freddie Gaudreau there. If I'm being completely honest, Brandon Duhaime should probably be on the third line as well. We'll talk about him when we get to Duhaime's player eval, because I think he has shown to be a player that is capable of playing more than a fourth line role and can help you in a bunch of different ways. And so you've got 2/3 of your third line taken care of right there. Maybe your options basically are this. You've got to trade Matt Zuccarello to free up that money, get him to waive and trade him to free up that money to sign Nyquist, and you put Nyquist on either the top line or you elevate from the second line up, or you move, say, Marcus Johansson down to the third line and you put Nyquist in that second spot while trading Marcus Foligno to free up a roster spot that way. I would lean more towards the second one, because I think at this point you just let Matt Zuccarello's deal play itself out, and then that's it. I don't know that at the age of 36, especially with the level of play that Zuccarello saw kind of dive at the end of the season. He's 35 right now, I beg your pardon, but the point still stands. I don't know that I am comfortable committing to Zuccarello for another contract at the age of 35. He'll be 36 by the time the season is done. And is he going to want to continue to play as a relatively new dad? Is he going to want to continue to play into his 40s or right up to the age of 40? I don't know. So that's when I think you just let it play out, and then that's it. Marcus Foligno's in a similar situation. Do you re-sign him going into, he'll be 32 at the end of next season when his deal is done? Do you re-sign him to a 1 or a 2 year deal? It's all going to depend. That is all going to depend entirely on how this season goes. And honestly, I don't know there as well. And so Nyquist, compared to those guys, you'd probably be more comfortable with a 2 year deal there than you would a 2 or 3 year deal with Foligno or Zuccarello. So those are the questions you have to ask yourself. Would you rather have Gustav Nyquist in the mix as more of a playmaker offensively? That's where it gets tricky. And here's the other part of the equation. I would think that Nyquist impressed enough down the stretch once he got away from Columbus. I would think that he impressed enough to where there is going to be a pretty healthy market for that type of player that can be a top 6 guy, a veteran who has postseason experience, who still has some pretty good handles offensively. There's going to probably be a pretty robust market for his services with teams that are willing to go longer term and higher AAV. And the Wild are not going to be able to afford to get into a bidding war with those teams. So you're also kind of penned in there. And here's the other part of the equation. And I know this isn't the kind of thing that gets said, publicly. Is he going to want to come here and potentially be a third line guy with opportunities higher in the lineup elsewhere? So as much as I would like to see Nyquist retained, because I do think he made that much of a difference for this team, it's just that the rest of the team, by and large, did not do really anything in that series against the Stars. As much as I'd like to see him return, I think there are a lot of factors that are going to lead to him going elsewhere. Take your pick: more money, longer contract, higher spot in the lineup. I think there are a lot of different things that he will be able to get elsewhere, and not here, which means you're not going to be able to retain the services that Nyquist has to offer, which means there's going to probably be a roster spot available to fill on that third line, depending on what happens with Foligno and depending on what happens with a couple of other members of the lineup. So all in all, for Nyquist, enjoyed having him here, thought he played very well, and I think could have given a little more to this team, just was not put in a situation to do it. And so that's unfortunate, and that'll be kind of one of the wonders of what could have been. But that's how it goes sometimes. So all in all, a great season for Nyquist, and we'll see where he latches on here in the offseason and what his contract looks like. Would not be surprised if it's a pretty solid deal for Nyquist. He definitely earned it for what he did down the stretch. So that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Wild. If this is your first time listening to the show, watching the show on YouTube, we thank you for tuning in and hope that you subscribe on YouTube and follow on your favorite podcast platforms. If you're an everydayer that tunes in every day of the week, we thank you for sticking with us, and we will see you on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Wild. Either way, make sure you subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and SiriusXM. Follow along with us throughout the rest of the offseason as we get you ready for the 2023-2024 season. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.